Lost in IKEA. Written by Ink in My Heart and on the Page. And read for you by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. Peter and Ned are forgotten inside IKEA. Playing hide-and-seek in IKEA was probably the best idea that Peter and Ned had ever had. The store was massive, with plenty of amazing hiding spots for them to choose, far more than what Ned's house had, and even better than the ones at the tower. Peter had never had so much fun playing hide-and-seek before. The Avengers were babysitting Peter and Ned. We don't need babysitters. Yeah, we're 8.5 for the day, while Tony and Pepper dealt with a crisis that SI was having. Normally, Tony would have taken Peter with him. His dad would say that Peter was the best way to get out of these so-called crises that the upper staff members used as an excuse to get Tony down to their floors for some one-on-one time. Don't tell your mum I told you that. However, this was a real emergency, so Tony had to recruit the Avengers to look after Peter and his best friend Ned for the day. Take him and Ned to the zoo or something, Tony had said as he rushed towards the elevator doors where Pepper was not so patiently waiting for him. Bye, Underoos. Be good. Peter had waved until he couldn't see his dad anymore and turned to look at his Uncle Steve, Bruce, Thor, Loki, and his Aunt Natasha. How about it? Uncle Steve asked. Would you like to go to the zoo? Peter and Ned shrugged. We went there with our school the other day, Ned piped up, while Peter had nodded emphatically beside him. How about the aquarium? Aunt Natasha asked. Would you like to see the penguins? I've heard they got a new platypus exhibit. Peter and Ned had cheered loudly, and so they had made their way to the aquarium. They spent the morning roaming the fancy water tanks, cooing over the fishes, jumping at the sharks that swam above them, racing the penguins back and forth, cartwheeling with the dolphins, and marvelling over the structure of the platypus. Thor got into a roaring match with a polar bear, and in Peter's opinion he won, but Steve and Loki dragged him away before a winner could be declared, as a staff member was looking at them weirdly. They had lunch at the aquarium cafeteria. This is food, Uncle Loki had asked, looking at his meal with a sneer. If you don't want your nuggets, can I have them? Ned had asked. Loki pushed them towards the boy, who grinned and whooped with delight. We should get back soon, Uncle Steve said, looking at the big watch around his wrist as they finished eating. Aww, Peter and Ned both whined at the same time. Perhaps we could visit the park named IKEA, Thor suggested a little too loudly, as Uncle Thor always seemed to be a little louder than everyone else, and Peter loved it. Clint was telling me about it. He says he takes his kids there all the time. Thor, he was teasing you, Uncle Bruce said gently. Yeah, let's go to IKEA, Peter perked up, bouncing in his seat. Yeah, Ned cheered. We could build our own house. Can we please? Peter pulled his best puppy dog eyes at his Uncle Steve. See, they want to go, Thor cheered, climbing to his feet. Let us depart. Nobody could argue with Ned, Peter, and Thor all pulling puppy dog eyes, and the group headed to IKEA. Peter was pretty sure that this was the biggest store he'd ever been to. It had taken them no time at all to get lost within the large halls of the store. No, we're here, Uncle Bruce said, pointing at the pamphlet that held a map of the store printed on it. See? No, we're here, Aunt Natasha tapped on another part of the map. Look, it's got all the bookcases. No. That's that part over here, Uncle Bruce insisted. Why don't you go play hide-and-seek, Uncle Steve suggested, when Peter and Ned had nearly toppled a stack of chairs they had been investigating as the adults discussed where they were. Just stay in this area. Cool! You're it! Peter shouted, and he and Ned ran off to find a place to hide. That had been what seemed like forever ago, and Uncle Steve still hadn't found them. Peter and Ned had taken to hiding in a small made-up office under a large desk. The carpet was very fluffy and comfortable, and Ned had snagged a book off one of the bookshelves, and the two of them had flicked through it as they waited to be found. Peter thought that if his dad were there, they would have been found by now. Tony always found Peter. He was the best seeker. Peter, Ned said. Yeah? I have to pee. Peter frowned. Me too. Come on. They crawled out from under the desk and brushed off their clothes. They made their way back to the concrete floor and followed the arrows. Peter looked up, looking at all the signs that hung above them, and saw one that looked like two people. This way, Peter grinned, and he grabbed Ned's hand and tugged him along. Tony stood at the front of IKEA, arms crossed with amusement, as he watched his friends leave the shop, all of them sporting frowns, except for Thor, who beamed widely and joyfully when he spotted Tony. When Tony had called to check up on his kid and Ned, he was baffled when Steve said that they were at IKEA. Thor suggested it. Steve had sighed down the phone. And then Peter and Ned were on board with the idea. We did go to the aquarium first. With the crisis dealt with at SI, Tony had hopped into his car and decided to meet the group at IKEA. He thought he could then take Peter and Ned for some ice cream before dropping Ned back at his house. IKEA is a death trap, Steve grumbled as they reached Tony. Those maps are useless, Natasha huffed. I enjoyed it, Thor beamed. Tony opened his mouth to make a quip when the words died in his throat. He looked around the group and his heart dropped into his stomach. Where are Peter and Ned? Tony demanded. The group looked around and then turned and stared at the building they had just exited. We forgot them inside, Bruce winced. God, Tony, we're so sorry. It's my fault, Steve shook his head. I told them to play hide and seek while we tried to figure out where we were. You told them to play hide and seek in that vortex of a place, Tony gasped. It could take weeks to find them. I will find them, Loki said quietly, and before their eyes, he vanished. We're so sorry, Tony, Natasha winced. Tony clenched his jaw. Reindeer Games had better find them or I'll stick pepper on you. The group winced, knowing how fiery Pepper could be when it came to Peter. Nobody wanted to cross that angry mother. They would rather face hordes of aliens than her wrath. Before Tony could work himself up and lose himself to images of Peter and Ned roaming the store getting more and more upset, Loki returned. Peter and Ned were holding one hand each, grinning from ear to ear. Do it again! Do it again! Peter and Ned cheered, jumping up and down, tugging on Loki's hands. No, Loki said deadpanned, pushing them towards Tony. Underoos, Tony said, scooping Peter into a hug. Dad! Peter cheered, hugging him back tightly. He pulled back, his cheeks looking flushed with excitement. Dad, you missed Thor getting into a roaring match with a polar bear! Sorry I missed that. Tony grinned with relief, pushing Peter's curls back from his face. He was safe and back here with him. He willed his heart to calm down. Pepper would never forgive Tony if he let their son get lost inside a store. Tony would never forgive himself, and he was sure that Mr. and Mrs. Leeds would have some choice words for Tony if he couldn't return their son home. It was awesome, Ned agreed, looking just as flustered. Glad you had fun, kids, Tony grinned. Say goodbye to this lot first. Time to take Ned home. Bye, Peter and Ned chorused together. Mr. Loki, 'cause you found us, it'll be your turn to hide next time. Peter beamed, waving wildly. Oh, goody, Loki drawled, but Tony caught a faint smile on his lips. Tony pushed Peter and Ned towards the car. He didn't have the heart to tell them that there would be very few games of hide and seek in their future. No way was he going through that heart attack again.